Rebecca Martinez had always been a fighter, but at 32, she found herself facing a battle she wasn't sure she could win. The sprawling Double M Ranch in Montana had been in her family for 4 generations, passed down through her great-grandfather who had homesteaded the land in 1889. Now, after her father's sudden death from a heart attack 6 months ago, she was drowning in debt and facing foreclosure from the ruthless Whitmore Banking Corporation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch's weathered barn as Rebecca stood on her front porch, clutching a letter that had arrived the previous day. The foreclosure notice gave her exactly 60 days to pay the outstanding loan of $287,000 or lose everything. Her hands trembled as she read the cold, formal language that threatened to destroy her family's legacy. "Miss Martinez, you need to face reality," Harold Whitmore had told her just a week ago when she'd visited his office in town. The portly banker had barely looked up from his mahogany desk as he delivered the crushing news. "Your father was a dreamer, not a businessman. This ranch has been bleeding money for years. My offer of $150,000 for the property is more than generous considering the circumstances." Rebecca had wanted to throw his offer back in his face, but desperation had a way of making even the proudest people consider impossible options. She knew Whitmore wanted her land for development. The ranch sat on prime real estate that could house a luxury resort, something he'd been planning for years. Her father had fought him tooth and nail, but now she was alone in this battle. Walking back into the farmhouse, Rebecca's eyes fell on an old newspaper clipping her neighbor Mrs. Patterson had given her as a joke. The headline read, "Mail-order marriages, a modern solution to modern problems." At the time, Rebecca had laughed it off, but now, staring at the foreclosure notice, desperate ideas began to form. She remembered reading about inheritance laws and how married women had more protection against creditors in certain circumstances. More importantly, she recalled her father mentioning that his original homestead agreement had a clause about family succession that could potentially protect the ranch if she was married, and had established a legitimate household. That evening, Rebecca found herself at her computer, researching matrimonial services online. The whole concept felt surreal. She was an independent woman who had never needed anyone to solve her problems. But this wasn't about romance or companionship. This was about survival and saving her family's legacy. After hours of browsing, she found a reputable agency called Frontier Companions that specialized in matching people for practical partnerships. The website looked professional, with testimonials from both men and women who had found success through arranged marriages. Rebecca created a profile, being completely honest about her situation and what she was looking for. "Seeking a partner for a practical arrangement," she wrote. "Own a working ranch in Montana. looking for someone who understands hard work and values family legacy. This is not about romance. This is about partnership and mutual benefit. Must be willing to commit to helping save a family business. Within 3 days, she had received over 50 responses. Most were from men looking for green cards or quick money, but one response stood out. It came from someone named Thomas Anderson, a 35-year-old man from California who claimed to have experience in ranch management and was looking for a fresh start. His message was thoughtful and genuine. "Dear Rebecca, I read your profile and I understand the situation you're facing. I've spent 15 years working in agricultural management and have always dreamed of owning my own ranch. I'm not looking for a fairy tale. I'm looking for a partnership where we can both work toward a common goal. I have some savings that could help with immediate expenses, and I'm willing to sign any legal documents that protect both our interests." They exchanged emails for 2 weeks, discussing everything from ranch operations to personal values. Thomas seemed knowledgeable about cattle, crop rotation, and ranch finances. He sent photos of himself, a tall, lean man with weathered hands and kind eyes, and shared stories about his work managing a large agricultural operation in California. "I've been saving money for years to buy my own place," he wrote in one email. "When I saw your profile, it seemed like fate. You need someone to help save your ranch, and I need a place to call home. We could make this work, Rebecca. I believe in what you're trying to do." Rebecca's practical nature warred with her skepticism. Could she really trust a complete stranger with her family's legacy? But as the foreclosure deadline approached, she realized she was running out of options. After extensive background checks and phone conversations, she made a decision that would change everything. She wired Thomas money for a plane ticket to Montana and prepared for his arrival. Her neighbors thought she had lost her mind. Mrs. Patterson, who had been like a mother to her since her parents died, was particularly vocal about her concerns. "Rebecca, honey, you don't know anything about this man," she said over coffee one morning. "What if he's dangerous? What if he's lying about everything? What if he's exactly what he claims to be?" Rebecca replied. "I've done my research, Mrs. Patterson. I've checked references, run background checks, and spoken with his previous employer. Sometimes you have to take a calculated risk." The day of Thomas's arrival, Rebecca cleaned the house from top to bottom and prepared the guest room. She had been clear that this was a business arrangement and that they would maintain separate living spaces until they figured out if their partnership would work. Standing at the small regional airport, Rebecca felt her heart racing as passengers began disembarking from the afternoon flight. She held a small sign with Thomas's name, feeling ridiculous but also oddly hopeful. When a tall man with sandy brown hair and worn boots approached her, She knew immediately it was him. Rebecca. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a slight accent she couldn't place. Thomas. She extended her hand, which he shook firmly. Welcome to Montana. The drive to the ranch was initially awkward, but Thomas's genuine enthusiasm about the landscape and his thoughtful questions about the ranch's operations helped break the ice. He asked about cattle numbers, grazing patterns, and seasonal challenges with the expertise of someone who truly understood ranching. Your father built something special here, he said as they pulled up to the ranch house. I can see why you're fighting to save it. That first evening, they sat on the porch discussing the financial situation and potential solutions. Thomas had brought $50,000 in savings, which could help with immediate expenses, but they both knew it wouldn't be enough to satisfy the loan. There's something else, Thomas said, pulling out a folder of documents. I've been researching Montana homestead laws and marriage protections. If we're legally married and I'm listed as a co-owner of the ranch, it becomes much harder for creditors to force a sale. We could restructure the debt and buy ourselves time to make the ranch profitable. Rebecca was impressed by his thoroughness. You've really thought this through. I told you, Rebecca. I believe in what you're trying to do here. Your family's legacy deserves to be preserved. Over the following weeks, Thomas threw himself into ranch work with an energy and knowledge that surprised Rebecca. He repaired fences, organized the cattle operation, and even identified several areas where they could cut costs and increase efficiency. His presence brought a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. But even as their professional partnership flourished, Rebecca began to notice small inconsistencies in Thomas's stories. Sometimes he would mention places he'd been or people he'd known, only to contradict himself later. When she asked about his family, he would change the subject or give vague answers. Everyone has things they'd rather not discuss, he said one evening when she pressed him about his past. I'm here now, Rebecca. Isn't that what matters? She wanted to believe him, but a nagging doubt was growing in her mind. Thomas Anderson seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Despite her concerns, the foreclosure deadline was approaching, and Thomas's plan remained their best option. They drove to the courthouse on a crisp October morning, both dressed in their best clothes, to apply for a marriage license. The clerk, a matronly woman who had known Rebecca's family for years, raised an eyebrow but processed their paperwork without comment. You sure about this, honey? She asked Rebecca quietly while Thomas was signing documents. As sure as I can be, Rebecca replied, though her voice lacked conviction. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for the following week, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses. Rebecca had chosen a simple blue dress, while Thomas wore a suit that looked expensive but seemed uncomfortable on his rancher's frame. Standing before the justice of the peace, Rebecca felt a mixture of hope and terror. She was about to legally bind herself to a man she barely knew, but she was also taking a step that could save everything her family had built. Do you, Rebecca Martinez, take Thomas Anderson to be your lawfully wedded husband? The justice asked. I do, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Do you, Thomas Anderson, take Rebecca Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife? Thomas hesitated for just a moment, so briefly that Rebecca almost missed it. I do. As they signed the marriage certificate, Rebecca noticed Thomas's hands were shaking slightly. She attributed it to nerves, but later, she would remember that moment as the first real sign that something was wrong. Their wedding night was awkward but respectful. Thomas had moved his belongings into the main house, but maintained his own room as they had agreed. They shared a quiet dinner and discussed their plans for restructuring the ranch's finances now that they were legally married. We did it, Thomas said, raising a glass of wine. We're partners now in every legal sense. Partners, Rebecca agreed, though the word felt strange in her mouth. That night, as she lay in her bed listening to Thomas moving around in the room down the hall, Rebecca allowed herself to feel a cautious optimism. Maybe this crazy plan would actually work. Maybe she had found someone who truly understood the value of family legacy and hard work. She had no idea that Thomas Anderson was not who he claimed to be, and that his true identity would soon turn her world upside down in ways she never could have imagined. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Rebecca was feeding the chickens when she heard a car pulling up the long gravel driveway. A black sedan with government plates came to a stop near the house, and two men in suits stepped out. Mrs. Martinez. The older man approached her with a badge. I'm Agent Williams with the FBI. We need to speak with you about your husband. Rebecca's blood ran cold. What about Thomas? Ma'am, the man you married is not Thomas Anderson. His real name is Marcus Volkov, and he's been running from federal authorities for the past 2 years. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Rebecca struggled to process what she was hearing. The chickens scattered as she dropped the feed bucket, her hands trembling as she stared at the agents. That's impossible, she whispered. I checked his background. I spoke to his references. Agent Williams exchanged a look with his partner. Ma'am, Marcus Volkov is extremely sophisticated. He's wanted for financial fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. The references you spoke to were part of an elaborate network he's built over the years. Rebecca felt like she was going to be sick. Where is he now? That's what we were hoping you could tell us. When did you last see your husband? The question hung in the air as Rebecca realized that Thomas Marcus had left early that morning, claiming he was going to town to meet with the bank about their loan restructuring. He should have been back hours ago. "He went to Whitmore Banking this morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he was going to present our marriage certificate and discuss new terms for the loan." The agents exchanged another look, and Rebecca knew immediately that something was very wrong. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. Harold Whitmore was found dead in his office this morning, and $2.3 million is missing from the bank's accounts." Rebecca's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees in the dirt. Everything she thought she knew about Thomas Anderson, about Marcus Volkov, crumbled around her. The man she had married to save her ranch was a killer and a thief, and now she was an accessory to murder. As the FBI agents helped her to her feet, Rebecca looked back at the ranch house where she had spent her childhood, where her father had taught her to ride horses and work cattle. She had been so desperate to save her family's legacy that she had invited a monster into her home. The irony was devastating. In trying to save the ranch from Harold Whitmore, she had married the man who would ultimately destroy them both. And now, as sirens wailed in the distance, Rebecca realized that her nightmare was just beginning. The Double M Ranch might survive the foreclosure, but it would never be the same. Neither would she. The FBI's field office in Helena buzzed with activity as Rebecca sat in a sterile interrogation room, still wearing her mud-stained ranch clothes from that morning. Agent Williams sat across from her, his expression a mixture of sympathy and suspicion that made her stomach churn. "Mrs. Martinez, or should I say Mrs. Volkov, we need you to understand the severity of this situation," Agent Williams began, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. "Your husband is one of the most wanted men in the country." Rebecca opened the folder with trembling fingers and found herself staring at a collection of photographs that made her blood run cold. The first image showed Thomas Marcus, but he looked different somehow. His hair was darker, his face was fuller, and he was wearing an expensive suit that was far from the humble ranch clothes she had grown accustomed to seeing him in. "His real name is Marcus Volkov," Agent Williams continued. "He's 38 years old, not 35 as he told you. He was born in Prague but immigrated to the United States when he was 16. He's a master manipulator who specializes in financial fraud and identity theft." Rebecca flipped through more photographs, each one showing Marcus in different contexts, sometimes as a businessman in a boardroom, sometimes as a construction worker, sometimes as a teacher. The man was a chameleon, able to become whoever he needed to be to achieve his goals. "How long has he been running?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "2 years," Agent Williams replied. He disappeared from Lowe's Angels after embezzling $4.2 million from a company where he worked as a financial advisor. Before that, he was suspected of similar crimes in Phoenix, Denver, and Chicago, but he always managed to stay one step ahead of us. Rebecca felt nauseous as she absorbed this information. The background checks I ran, the references I spoke to, how did he fake all of that? Marcus has an extensive network of accomplices, Agent Williams explained. Some are willing participants, others are people he's manipulated or blackmailed into helping him. He's incredibly sophisticated, Mrs. Martinez. He's been planning this identity for months, maybe years. The agent pulled out another photograph, this one showing Marcus with a different woman, a blonde in her 40s who was smiling brightly at the camera. This is Jennifer Walsh from Phoenix. Marcus married her 18 months ago using the identity of David Thompson. She thought she was helping him start a landscaping business. Instead, he cleaned out her savings account and disappeared in the middle of the night. Rebecca stared at the photograph, seeing her own hope and desperation reflected in Jennifer's smile. How many women has he done this to? At least 6 that we know of, Agent Williams said grimly. Maybe more. He targets women who are vulnerable, recently divorced, financially struggling, or dealing with family crises. He becomes exactly what they need him to be. The room fell silent as Rebecca processed this information. She had been so proud of her thorough background checks, so convinced that she was making a smart, calculated decision. Instead, she had been played by a master manipulator who had studied her weaknesses and exploited them perfectly. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to understand that you're not just a victim here, Agent Williams said, his tone becoming more serious. Harold Whitmore was murdered this morning, and $2.3 million is missing from his bank. Marcus, your husband, is the prime suspect. As his wife, you could be charged as an accessory. Rebecca's head snapped up. I had nothing to do with Whitmore's murder. I was at the ranch all morning feeding animals and doing chores. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson can verify that. We believe you, Agent Williams said. But the law doesn't care about your intentions. You're legally married to a fugitive who has committed multiple felonies. Unless you help us catch him, you could be facing serious charges. Rebecca felt trapped, like a mouse in a maze with no exit. What do you want me to do? Tell us everything you know about Marcus. Where he might go, what he might do next, any plans he mentioned. And if he contacts you, you need to let us know immediately. Over the next several hours, Rebecca recounted every conversation she'd had with Marcus, every story he'd told her, every detail about his supposed background. She told them about his knowledge of ranching, his plans for restructuring the ranch's finances, and his apparent genuine care for preserving her family's legacy. He seemed to really understand what the ranch meant to me, Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. He talked about family legacy and the importance of preserving what previous generations had built. It felt so real. Agent Williams made notes as she spoke. Marcus is extremely good at becoming what people need him to be. He spent weeks studying you, Mrs. Martinez. He knew about your father's death, your financial struggles, and your personality. He crafted the perfect persona to appeal to you. The agent showed her more evidence, bank records showing that Marcus had been gradually moving money from various accounts, travel records indicating he had been in Montana for several weeks before contacting her, and surveillance footage from the matrimonial agency's offices that showed him meeting with someone who appeared to be giving him detailed information about potential targets. He didn't just stumble across your profile, Agent Williams explained. He was specifically looking for someone in your situation, a woman with property, financial difficulties, and a strong motivation to find a solution quickly. Rebecca felt violated in a way that went beyond the simple betrayal of trust. Marcus had dissected her life, studied her vulnerabilities, and manipulated her emotions with the precision of a surgeon. Every moment of hope she had felt, every small kindness he had shown, had been calculated and fake. The worst part is that I was starting to like him, she admitted to Agent Williams. Not romantically, but as a partner. He worked so hard on the ranch, and he seemed to genuinely care about making it successful. That's what makes Marcus so dangerous, the agent replied. He doesn't just lie to people, he becomes the lie. For those few weeks, he probably convinced himself that he really was Thomas Anderson, that he really cared about your ranch. As evening approached, Rebecca was allowed to return to the ranch under FBI supervision. Agent Williams and his partner followed her home, where they began a thorough search of the property. They found Marcus's room largely empty. He had taken most of his belongings, leaving behind only a few items of clothing and toiletries. But in the bottom drawer of the dresser, Agent Williams found something that made Rebecca's blood run cold. It was a detailed notebook filled with Marcus's handwriting, containing information about her daily routines, her financial situation, her emotional state, and her relationship with her neighbors. Rebecca rises at 5:30 a.m., one entry read. Feeds chickens first, then cattle. Spends 10-15 minutes at her father's grave every morning. Very emotional about family legacy. Deeply afraid of losing ranch. Trusts easily if approached correctly. Another entry was even more chilling. H. Whitmore visits ranch monthly to pressure Rebecca about loan. Arrives alone, usually around 2 p.m. Drives same route every time. Predictable schedule could be useful. Rebecca sank into a chair as she read page after page of Marcus's observations about her life. He had been studying her like a specimen, noting her weaknesses and planning how to exploit them. He was planning to kill Whitmore from the beginning, she whispered. This was never about saving the ranch. It was about getting access to the bank. Agent Williams nodded grimly. Marcus needed a way to get close to Whitmore and access to the bank systems. Marrying you gave him a legitimate reason to meet with the banker and discuss financial matters. He probably planned to kill Whitmore and disappear with the money, leaving you to deal with the consequences. The realization hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She hadn't just been a victim of Marcus's con. She had been a tool in his plan to commit murder. Her desperate attempt to save her family's ranch had made her an unwitting accomplice to a killer. That night, Rebecca sat on her porch with FBI agents stationed around her property, staring out at the land her great-grandfather had homesteaded more than a century ago. The ranch that had been in her family for 4 generations was now a crime scene, and she was a suspect in a murder investigation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. I really did care about you and the ranch. Don't trust anyone from the FBI. There's more to this story than they're telling you. T." Rebecca stared at the message, her heart pounding. Even now, after everything she had learned, part of her wanted to believe that Marcus had genuinely cared about her. But she knew better now. She knew that Marcus Volkov was a master manipulator who would say anything to achieve his goals. She handed the phone to Agent Williams, who read the message and immediately began making calls to trace the number. As Rebecca watched the FBI agents spring into action, she realized that her nightmare was far from over. Marcus was still out there, still dangerous, and still using her as a pawn in whatever game he was playing. The worst part was that she had no idea what he was planning next. 3 days had passed since Harold Whitmore's murder, and Rebecca felt like she was living in a nightmare that refused to end. FBI agents had turned her ranch into a command center, with surveillance equipment, communication devices, and armed personnel stationed throughout the property. Every time she stepped outside, she was reminded that she was both a potential victim and a suspect in a federal investigation. Agent Williams had been largely absent, coordinating the manhunt for Marcus from the FBI's regional headquarters, but his partner, Agent Sarah Chen, had remained at the ranch to monitor communications and provide security. Rebecca found herself oddly comforted by the younger agent's presence, even though she knew Chen was there to watch her as much as protect her. "Any word on Marcus?" Rebecca asked Chen as they sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the Montana landscape. "Nothing concrete," Chen replied, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "But we're tracking several leads. Marcus is smart, but he's also desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes. Rebecca nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Marcus had fooled her completely, and she had considered herself a pretty good judge of character. If he could convince her to marry him based on a fabricated identity, what else was he capable of? Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number Marcus had used 3 days earlier. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened the message. "Meet me at the old Miller cabin tonight at 10 p.m. Come alone. I need to explain everything. There are things about Whitmore's death that you don't understand. If you bring the FBI, people will die. T." Rebecca showed the message to Agent Chen, who immediately began making phone calls. Within minutes, the kitchen was filled with federal agents discussing surveillance strategies and arrest protocols. "We can use this," Agent Williams said, having rushed back from headquarters. "Marcus is getting careless. He's reaching out because he needs something from you, Mrs. Martinez." "What could he possibly need from me?" Rebecca asked. "He's already destroyed my life." "Information, maybe. Or he might be planning to use you as a hostage to negotiate his escape," Williams replied. "The Miller cabin is about 15 miles from here, up in the hills. It's isolated, which makes it perfect for our purposes." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "You want me to go meet him?" "With full backup and surveillance, yes. It's our best chance to apprehend him." The thought of seeing Marcus again made Rebecca feel sick, but she knew she had no choice. She was trapped in this situation, and the only way out was through. As the FBI agents made their preparations, Rebecca found herself thinking about the past few weeks and trying to identify the signs she had missed. Looking back, there had been small inconsistencies in Marcus's stories, moments when his facade had slipped just slightly. She remembered the way his hands had shaken during their wedding ceremony, how he had sometimes seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. But there had also been moments that had felt genuine, times when he had worked alongside her on the ranch, when he had listened to her stories about her father and her family's history. Had all of that been fake? Or had there been some part of Marcus that had genuinely connected with her situation? "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Chen approached her as she was getting ready for the evening's operation. "I need you to understand that this is extremely dangerous. Marcus has already killed once, and he has nothing left to lose." Rebecca nodded, though her stomach was churning. "I understand. If anything feels wrong, if you sense any danger at all, you give us the signal and we'll move in immediately. Your safety is our top priority." The Miller cabin was a relic from the 1940s, built by a homesteader who had tried and failed to make a living in the harsh Montana wilderness. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, with no electricity or running water. Rebecca had been there a few times as a child, usually during family hunting trips. As she drove up the winding mountain road, Rebecca could see FBI vehicles hidden among the trees, their occupants invisible but reassuring. She was wearing a wire, and Agent Williams was monitoring her every word from a command vehicle parked half a mile away. The cabin looked exactly as she remembered it: weathered wood, broken windows, and a door that hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But as she approached, she could see a faint light coming from inside. Marcus was already there. Rebecca's heart pounded as she pushed open the door and stepped inside. Marcus was sitting at a rough wooden table, illuminated by a battery-powered lantern. He looked different somehow, thinner, more haggard, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant fear. "Hello, Rebecca," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." "I came because I need answers," Rebecca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to know who you really are and why you destroyed my life." Marcus gestured to a chair across from him. "Please sit. There's so much I need to tell you." Rebecca remained standing, her hand near the panic button Agent Chen had given her. "Start talking." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their time together on the ranch. Even now, despite everything she knew about him, there was something familiar and almost comforting about his mannerisms. "My name is Marcus Volkov," he began. "That much is true, but almost everything else I told you was a lie. I'm not from California, I've never managed a ranch, and I'm not the man you think I am." "I know all of that," Rebecca said. "The FBI told me about your criminal history, about the other women you've conned. What I don't understand is why you chose me." Marcus looked up at her, and for a moment she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like genuine pain. "Because you reminded me of someone I used to know, someone I cared about a long time ago." Rebecca felt her resolve wavering. Even now, even knowing what he was, Marcus had a way of making her want to believe him. "That's not an answer." "Her name was Elena," Marcus continued. "She was my wife, my real wife, back in Prague. We had a small farm outside the city and we were happy. Really happy, Rebecca. Not the fake happiness I've been selling to Marx for the past few years." Rebecca found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn in despite herself. What happened to her? "She died," Marcus said simply. "Cancer. We didn't have money for treatment, couldn't afford the medications she needed. I watched her waste away while I worked 3 jobs trying to save enough money to help her. She died in my arms, Rebecca, and I swore I would never be that powerless again." The story felt genuine, but Rebecca forced herself to remember that Marcus was a master manipulator. "So you became a criminal." "I became whatever I needed to become to survive," Marcus replied. "I started small: credit card fraud, identity theft, small cons. But I discovered I had a talent for becoming other people, for making people trust me. And the more successful I became, the easier it was to justify what I was doing. Rebecca shook her head. You're trying to make me feel sorry for you. No, Marcus said firmly. I'm trying to make you understand that when I met you, something changed. For the first time in years, I felt like I could be myself with someone. Not Marcus the con man, not Thomas the helpful ranch hand, but just me. Everything about Thomas Anderson was a lie, Rebecca said. The identity was a lie, Marcus admitted, but the feelings weren't. I really did care about you, Rebecca. I really did want to help save your ranch. Rebecca felt tears stinging her eyes, but she blinked them back. If you cared about me, why did you kill Harold Whitmore? Marcus's expression changed, becoming harder and more desperate. Because I didn't have a choice. Whitmore recognized me, Rebecca. He knew who I really was. The admission hit Rebecca like a physical blow. What do you mean he recognized you? Harold Whitmore wasn't just some small-town banker, Marcus said. He was connected to people I'd crossed before, people who had been looking for me. When I went to his office that morning to discuss the loan restructuring, he took one look at me and knew exactly who I was. Rebecca felt the room spinning around her. You're saying Whitmore was involved in your criminal activities? Not directly, Marcus replied, but he was laundering money for some very dangerous people, people who had put a price on my head. When he recognized me, he made a phone call. He was going to turn me in, Rebecca. If I hadn't killed him, I would have been dead within hours. The revelation was staggering. Harold Whitmore, the respected banker who had been trying to foreclose on her ranch, had been involved in money laundering and organized crime. Rebecca felt like everything she thought she knew about her situation was crumbling around her. You're lying, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I can prove it, Marcus said, pulling out a manila envelope. I found these documents in Whitmore's office safe before I killed him. Bank records, wire transfer receipts, communication logs. Whitmore was moving millions of dollars for criminal organizations. Rebecca stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it but desperate to know the truth. Why are you telling me this? Because the people Whitmore was working for are still out there, Marcus said, and they think you might know something about their operations. They think Whitmore might have told you about the money laundering before he died. Rebecca felt cold fear creeping up her spine. But I don't know anything about that. I know that and you know that, but they don't know that, Marcus replied. They're going to come for you, Rebecca. They're going to torture you until you tell them what you know, and when they realize you don't know anything, they're going to kill you. The cabin fell silent except for the sound of wind through the trees outside. Rebecca tried to process what Marcus was telling her, but it was too much, too overwhelming. What do you want from me? she asked finally. I want you to disappear with me, Marcus said. I have money, fake identities, safe houses. I can protect you, Rebecca, but we have to leave tonight. Rebecca looked at the man she had married, the man who had deceived her and murdered someone in cold blood, and she realized that despite everything, she was tempted by his offer. Her life in Montana was over regardless of what happened next. The ranch would be sold, her reputation was destroyed, and now she was apparently a target for organized crime. But as she looked into Marcus's eyes, she saw something that made her decision clear. Despite his claims of caring about her, despite his apparent genuine emotion, she could see the calculation behind his expression. He was still manipulating her, still trying to use her for his own purposes. No, she said firmly, I won't run away with you. Marcus's expression hardened. Then you're going to die, Rebecca. They'll be here soon, and when they find you. Let me worry about that, Rebecca replied, her hand moving toward the panic button. Marcus must have sensed her intention because he suddenly lunged forward, knocking over the lantern and plunging the cabin into darkness. Rebecca screamed and pressed the panic button as Marcus grabbed her arm. I'm sorry, Rebecca, he whispered in her ear, but I can't let you bring the FBI down on me. You're coming with me whether you want to or not. Outside, Rebecca could hear the sound of vehicles approaching at high speed. The FBI was coming, but would they be in time to save her from the man she had married? The cabin erupted into chaos as Marcus dragged Rebecca toward the back door. The sound of vehicles surrounded the building, and powerful searchlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the interior through the broken windows. FBI, the building is surrounded. Agent Williams's voice boomed through a megaphone. Marcus Volkov, release Mrs. Martinez and come out with your hands up. Marcus pressed Rebecca against the wall beside the rear door, his arm around her throat. In the harsh light from the FBI's spotlights, she could see the desperation in his eyes. This was no longer the charming con man who had swept her off her feet with promises of partnership and mutual respect. This was a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. You don't understand what you've done, Marcus whispered in her ear. Those documents I showed you, they're copies. I sent the originals to Whitmore's criminal associates before I came here. They know you have them now. Rebecca tried to speak, but Marcus's arm was cutting off her air supply. She could hear FBI agents moving around the perimeter of the cabin, positioning themselves for what was obviously going to be a coordinated assault. I never wanted to hurt you, Marcus continued, his voice strained with what sounded like genuine regret. But you've left me no choice. The people Whitmore worked for won't just kill you, Rebecca. They'll make you suffer first. Through the chaos of shouts and radio chatter outside, Rebecca heard something that made her blood run cold, the distant sound of motorcycles approaching. Marcus heard it too, and his grip on her tightened. "They're here," he said. "Whitmore's people. The FBI led them right to us." Agent Williams's voice came through the megaphone again. "Marcus, we can protect Mrs. Martinez, but only if you release her now. Don't make this worse than it already is." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Protect her? You have no idea what you're dealing with. These people have connections everywhere, including inside your precious FBI." Rebecca managed to gasp out a few words. "You're lying." "Am I?" Marcus loosened his grip slightly, allowing her to breathe. "How do you think they found us so quickly? Someone told them about tonight's operation." The sound of the motorcycles was getting closer, and Rebecca could see the panic in the FBI agents' movements through the windows. Whatever was happening, it was clear that the federal agents hadn't expected additional players in this confrontation. Marcus pulled a gun from his jacket. Rebecca hadn't even known he was armed. "I'm going to give you a choice, Rebecca. You can come with me willingly, and I'll do everything I can to keep you safe from these people. Or you can stay here and trust the FBI to protect you, knowing that there's a leak in their organization." Rebecca's mind raced as she tried to process her options. Could Marcus be telling the truth about corruption in the FBI? It seemed impossible, but then again, she had thought it was impossible that her husband was a wanted criminal. The sound of gunfire erupted outside the cabin, causing both Rebecca and Marcus to duck instinctively. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes and FBI agents taking cover behind their vehicles. "Jesus," Marcus muttered. "They're not here to negotiate." Agent Chen's voice crackled over a radio that had been left near the door. "Command, we have multiple armed hostiles approaching from the east. Request immediate backup." Marcus grabbed Rebecca's hand. "We have to go now." Despite everything he had done, despite all the lies and manipulation, Rebecca found herself following Marcus toward the cabin's back door. The alternative, staying in a building that was about to become a war zone, seemed even more dangerous. They slipped out the back door just as the sound of gunfire intensified. Marcus led her through the dark forest, moving with the confidence of someone who had scouted the area in advance. Rebecca stumbled over roots and rocks, but Marcus kept her upright, his grip on her hand both protective and possessive. Behind them, the cabin was lit up like a Christmas tree with muzzle flashes and searchlights. Rebecca could hear Agent Williams shouting orders, but his voice was being drowned out by the sound of automatic weapons fire. "Who are those people?" Rebecca gasped as they ran through the trees. "Professional killers," Marcus replied without slowing down. "Whitmore was laundering money for the Kozlov organization. They're Russian, and they don't forgive betrayal." They reached a small clearing where Marcus had hidden a motorcycle. He handed Rebecca a helmet and started the engine, which roared to life in the quiet forest. "Get on," he ordered. Rebecca hesitated. Once she got on that motorcycle, she would officially be a fugitive. There would be no going back to her old life, no chance of clearing her name or saving her ranch. But behind them, the sound of gunfire was getting closer, and she could hear voices shouting in what sounded like a foreign language. The FBI might be able to protect her from Marcus, but could they protect her from international criminals? She climbed onto the motorcycle just as the first armed figures emerged from the trees behind them. Marcus gunned the engine, and they roared off into the darkness, leaving the chaos of the cabin behind. As they rode through the mountain roads, Rebecca clung to Marcus and tried to make sense of what had happened. Had the FBI really been compromised? Was Marcus telling the truth about Whitmore's criminal connections? Or was this all part of an elaborate manipulation designed to make her dependent on him? After an hour of riding, Marcus pulled the motorcycle into an abandoned gas station and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, Rebecca could hear her heart pounding. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now. Rebecca shook her head, though she wasn't sure if that was true. Everything hurt, her body from the rough ride, her heart from the betrayal, and her soul from the realization that her life as she knew it was over. "Where are we going?" she asked. "I have a safe house about 50 miles from here," Marcus replied. "We can rest there and figure out our next move." Rebecca looked at him in the dim light of the abandoned gas station. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the lies and violence, there was still something about Marcus that made her want to trust him. Maybe it was Stockholm Syndrome, or maybe it was just the fact that he was the only familiar thing in a world that had suddenly become completely alien. "Marcus," she said quietly, "tell me the truth, all of it. If we're going to do this, if I'm going to trust you with my life, I need to know who you really are." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty highway. "My real name is Marcus Volkov," he began. "I was born in Prague in 1987. My parents were small-time criminals who abandoned me when I was 12. I lived on the streets until I was 16, then managed to get a visa to come to America." He paused as if deciding how much to reveal. "I worked legitimate jobs for a few years, trying to build a normal life. I met Alina when I was 22. She was a waitress at a diner where I used to eat breakfast before work. We got married, moved to a small apartment, and I thought I had found happiness." Rebecca listened without interrupting, sensing that this might be the first completely honest conversation they had ever had. "When Alina got sick, I exhausted all legal options to get her treatment. I took out loans, worked multiple jobs, even tried to set up a fundraising campaign online. Nothing worked. The treatments she needed were experimental and incredibly expensive. Marcus's voice became strained with emotion. I started with small crimes, credit card fraud, identity theft, anything to raise money quickly. By the time I had enough saved, it was too late. Alina died while I was in jail on a petty theft charge. Rebecca felt her heart breaking for him, despite everything he had done. "I'm sorry." "After Alina died, I didn't care about anything anymore," Marcus continued. "I kept committing crimes, but now it was about survival rather than love. I got better at it, more sophisticated. I learned to become different people, to make others trust me." He looked at her directly. "When I saw your profile on that matrimonial website, I thought you would be just another Mark, someone to exploit for money and then abandon. But when I got to your ranch, when I saw how hard you were fighting to preserve your family's legacy, it reminded me of how I felt about Alina." Rebecca wanted to believe him, but she had been fooled before. "How do I know you're not manipulating me right now?" "Because I'm risking my life to keep you safe," Marcus replied. "If I only cared about myself, I would have disappeared after killing Whitmore. Instead, I'm here, making myself a target because I couldn't stand the thought of those animals hurting you." The sound of helicopters in the distance interrupted their conversation. Marcus immediately started the motorcycle engine. "They've found us," he said. "We have to go." As they rode off into the night, Rebecca realized that she had made her choice. She was officially a fugitive now, running from both the law and international criminals with a man she barely knew but was somehow completely dependent on. Her old life was gone forever. The ranch, her friends, her identity as Rebecca Martinez, all of it was in the past. Now she was someone else, someone running through the darkness with a killer and a liar who claimed to love her. The worst part was that despite everything, she was starting to believe that his feelings for her might actually be real. And that terrified her more than anything else that had happened. As they disappeared into the vast Montana wilderness, Rebecca wondered if she would ever see her home again, or if she was destined to spend the rest of her life running from the consequences of one desperate decision to save her family's ranch. The helicopters were getting closer, and Marcus was driving faster, taking risks on the winding mountain roads that could get them both killed. But somehow, as she held onto him and felt the wind whipping through her hair, Rebecca felt more alive than she had in months. Maybe that was what scared her the most of all. 6 months later, Rebecca stood on the deck of a small beach house in Belize, watching the sun set over the Caribbean Sea. Her hair was shorter now and dyed black, and she had lost 20 pounds from the stress and constant movement of life on the run. The woman looking back at her from mirrors no longer looked like Rebecca Martinez, the Montana rancher who had once fought to save her family's legacy. She had become Elena Santos, complete with forged documents and a fabricated history that Marcus had purchased from his network of criminal contacts. It was a name she had chosen herself, partly in honor of Marcus's dead wife, and partly because it felt like the death of her old identity deserved some kind of memorial. Marcus emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, his appearance as changed as hers. His hair was bleached blonde, and he had grown a beard that made him look like a completely different person. More importantly, the desperate edge that had characterized his behavior during their escape had softened into something that resembled contentment. "Any regrets?" he asked, handing her a cup and settling into the chair beside her. It was a question he asked her regularly, and Rebecca suspected he needed constant reassurance that she wasn't planning to turn him into the authorities. The truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. "Every day," she replied honestly, "but not about leaving." They had been through hell together over the past 6 months. After escaping from the cabin in Montana, they had spent weeks moving from safe house to safe house, while both the FBI and the Kozlov organization hunted them. Marcus had been right about the leak in the federal task force. They later learned that Agent Williams had been feeding information to Whitmore's criminal associates in exchange for a substantial monthly payment. The revelation had shattered Rebecca's faith in institutions and authority figures. If she couldn't trust the FBI to protect her from criminals, who could she trust? In the end, the only person who had consistently kept her safe was Marcus, the same man who had destroyed her life in the first place. "I got word from our contact in Mexico City," Marcus said, settling back in his chair. "The Kozlov organization has given up the hunt. They've written off the money Whitmore stole and moved on to other priorities." Rebecca felt a wave of relief wash over her. For months, they had lived with the constant fear that professional killers were tracking them. The stress had been almost unbearable. "And the FBI?" she asked. "Still looking, but not as actively. We're yesterday's news. They have bigger cases to focus on." Rebecca nodded, though she wasn't sure how she felt about being forgotten. Part of her missed being important enough to hunt. Their new life in Belize was surprisingly peaceful. Marcus had enough money hidden in offshore accounts to support them comfortably, and they had settled into a routine that felt almost domestic. He worked as a fishing guide for tourists, using his natural charisma and people skills in a legitimate way for the first time in years. Rebecca had started teaching English to local children, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping others learn. But beneath the surface tranquility, Rebecca struggled with questions about identity, morality, and love. Was she a victim or an accomplice? Had Marcus really changed? Or was she still being manipulated by a master con artist? Did it matter as long as she was happy? Rebecca, Marcus said, using her real name despite the risk. There's something I need to tell you. She looked at him, nodding the serious expression on his face. After 6 months together, she had learned to read his moods, and this was his confession face. What is it? Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Rebecca's heart stopped as she realized what was happening. I know our marriage was a sham, he said. A business arrangement that got completely out of hand. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me. You became real for me. Rebecca stared at the box, her emotions in turmoil. Marcus. I love you, he said simply. Not as Thomas Anderson loved Rebecca Martinez, but as Marcus Volkov loves the woman you've become. I want to marry you again, properly this time. Not as a con or a scheme, but because I can't imagine my life without you. Rebecca took the box with trembling hands and opened it to reveal a simple diamond ring. It was beautiful, but more importantly, it represented something she had never expected to find in her chaotic new life: genuine love. I don't even know who I am anymore, she said, tears streaming down her face. I'm not Rebecca Martinez, the rancher. I'm not Elena Santos, the fugitive. I don't know what I am. You're the woman who saved my life, Marcus replied. Not by helping me escape from the law, but by helping me remember what it felt like to care about someone other than myself. Rebecca looked out at the ocean, thinking about the ranch she would never see again, the neighbors who probably thought she was dead, and the family legacy that had been lost forever. Then she looked at Marcus, the man who had destroyed her old life but given her a new one. Ask me again in a year, she said finally. If we're still here, still together, still happy, ask me again. Marcus smiled and nodded. I can wait. As they sat together watching the sun disappear into the Caribbean Sea, Rebecca realized that she had found something she never expected: peace. Not the peace of security or certainty, but the peace that comes from accepting that life is unpredictable and dangerous and beautiful all at the same time. Her ranch was gone, her old identity was dead, and she was technically a federal fugitive living with a murderer. But for the first time in years, she was truly happy. Maybe that made her a bad person, or maybe it just made her human. The sound of children laughing drifted up from the beach below, where her students were playing soccer in the sand. Tomorrow, she would teach them about irregular verbs and proper pronunciation. Marcus would take tourists out to catch snappers and marlins. They would have dinner at the little restaurant down the road and dance to the local band that played every Tuesday night. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen. And despite everything that had led her here, Rebecca found that she could live with that choice. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus reached over and took her hand. His palm was calloused from honest work, and his grip was steady and sure. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something worth saving in me." Rebecca squeezed his hand and smiled. "Thank you for saving me from a life I was too afraid to leave behind." They sat in comfortable silence as the night settled around them, two broken people who had somehow managed to fix each other. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And after everything they had been through, real was enough. The woman who had once been Rebecca Martinez closed her eyes and listened to the sound of waves against the shore, finally at peace with the choices that had brought her to this place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new questions about who she was and what she wanted from life. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged,